Today's talk is about nuclear fuel waste, which is the legal term because there's the Nuclear Fuels Waste Act that sort of defines what it is. The title here says a wise solution to spent nuclear fuel. That sounds like it's really exhaustive, and I think it's a wrong term because I think it's better if we used a wiser solution to slightly used nuclear fuel. And I'll explain that. It'll become obvious in the seminar. Now, if you fall asleep while you're still awake, I should try to give you the take-home message right away. And that is essentially that radioactive nuclear fuel waste is really not waste at all, but that it's a huge non-carbon energy source worth about $1 billion per ton. And we have over 40,000 tons of it. If we take advantage of this possibility, then at the same time we can reduce the radioactive lifetime from the order of 1,000,000 years, which is the lifetime right now, to less than 300 years. And at the same time, what's left over after those 300 years is then a non-radioactive residue, which is perfectly good atoms. And those atoms by themselves, stored someplace, and then non-radioactive, would be worth $2.5 million per ton because it contains things like rhodium and palladium and rare earths, which you use for solar panels, for instance. The beauty is that we can do this now because the technology exists and the money, if we do it right, is actually available to do it. Now, there are constitutional hurdles because we have a provincial government, and we have a federal government. And we have a constitution that says there's a division of powers. And that really makes things difficult. And so if there are any experts in the audience, I would ask you to think about how you can help once I convince you. And that will be the rest of the talk. So we'll start about looking at what nuclear waste actually is, then indicate where the huge value potentially comes from, because that gives us the incentive to try and do something. Then we'll characterize the nuclear waste, because once we know what it is, it gives us an approach that we can use to extract more energy and do things. People have been thinking about that to some extent, but they've only really tried partial solutions because they have a certain technology to satisfy. But we'll go then directly to the fast-neutron approach and indicate that it's actually existed. And we can find out what type of fuel utilization has been achieved, and then my calculations that indicate what might be possible. Of course, after Fukushima, there's no talk on nuclear matters that doesn't touch on safety, so I'll do that as well. And then indicate the availability of the technology and the cost, of course. It's always important. So let's start right in. In Canada in 2011, I could take any year, we had about 44,000 tons of used CANDU fuel waste. And that increases at about and so it's not a large volume. But the worry is that it's highly radioactive, and the lifetime to decay to background levels back to the natural uranium is of the order of 1,000,000 years. Now, we've done studies since the 70s where Professor Hare essentially gave us a report which indicated that we should bury this material in a deep geological repository somewhere in the Canadian Shield. Since then, we've studied the Canadian Shield in an underground laboratory in Pinawa, in Manitoba, and had a panel looking at the environmental aspects and sociological aspects for about over 10 years. And their recommendation was to involve communities, because radioactive matters are sort of worrisome in one's mind. That resulted eventually in the Nuclear Fuel Waste Act, and that created the Nuclear Waste Management Organization. And they were charged within 3 years to come up with a report as to what to do. And so by now we've spent about $300 million or so, and the report says we should bury it in a deep geological repository. Reminds me of 1977. But they were smart enough to say, well, let's do this with some thought. And they chose a so-called adaptive phased management, which says it gives us time. So perhaps I can persuade them to go in a different direction. A deep geological repository is supposed to be sort of a gallery of tunnels deep underground, 500 to 1,000 meters underground, and it's going to cost us of the order of $24 billion, or if it's twice that size, there's a little bit of economy of scale there, but not much. And according to, and following the Seaborn report, they're asking communities to come forward, and they have 22 by now. I think the last report in the that I've read was that it was 21, so maybe one has been eliminated. That's the site selection process that they're in. The rest of the world, in the meantime, has accumulated 300,000 tons of this material, and that increases at the order of 10,000 tons per year. And they're thinking along exactly the same line, and so we're not unique. Everyone wants to build a deep geological repository. The French say that the material must be retrievable by law, as though they perhaps know that it might be valuable. For us, it says it's retrievable for years as long as the repository is open, but even once you backfill the galleries, it's going to be difficult to retrieve it. And so, is this a good idea? Obviously, I wouldn't be standing in front of you if I thought it was. And so let's take a look at what this material actually is. Our 44,000 tons have actually only been used to the tune of about 300 tons. And by used, I mean that we've taken the uranium and we've split it to extract the nuclear energy of 300 tons of this 44,000. That's less than 1%, 0.75%. That's why I say it's slightly used. The rest of the world seems to be doing better. They have extracted 3.4% out of their so-called fuel waste. But that's deceptive because they use light water reactors, which are less efficient at using neutrons. And so they have to enrich their fuel for uranium-235 that's in the natural uranium. And so what's left is that we have depleted uranium, the order of 2 million tons that have accumulated since then. And of course, that's not used at all. And so if we consider mined uranium, then the light water reactors have used less than 0.5% of the material. And so you can see that the CANDU reactor is a marvelous reactor. It's about 50% more efficient than any other reactor in the world, except the ones that I'm going to talk about. And so even if we add our own contribution, it's still in total less than 0.5% of the material that's been used. So the obvious question is, what if we use more of it, or ideally all of it? If we take the Canadian case, instead of using the 0.75% that we've used, we use all of the rest of it. And instead of just the 1,400 tons here, we use all of the 44,000 tons. Then that's an easy calculation because it's merely ratios of these numbers. That's down here. And for instance, in terms of the efficiency, we can extract 134 times more energy out of the material than we're doing now. And nuclear energy is a lot. So this is enormous. And so if we then take the total number of tons, then the amount of electricity that we could create out of all of that is an additional close to $50 trillion. So I would not call this waste at all. I think it's a tremendous asset. If you look at it differently, this $11.5 billion was created in 1 year, and so that the $50 trillion worth would power us at the same level that we create electricity now for over 4,000 years. And we call it waste. So if you now look at the Deep Geological Repository, which say is supposed to cost $24 billion, if we put the material down there and we can't get at it again, then we've lost the order of $50 trillion of energy. And we can make the reactors more efficient so this number can actually go up. Now that's such a large number that I didn't know whether anybody would understand how big that is. And so someone in my lab said, well, that's easy, just divide by the population of Canada. And that means that this amount is $1.4 million per Canadian that we would put down into this Deep Geological Repository. So I would say that I don't want my $1.4 million to go down there. Perhaps you don't either. So let's take a look at some more detail, and this is where I perhaps become more professorial. The fresh fuel, the uranium, is actually made up of two types of atoms, the uranium-235 and uranium-238. There's very little uranium-235 there, but that's the material that's used in CANDU reactors. It's called fissile because it splits very easily with the slow neutrons that are used in CANDU reactors and also in light water reactors. Once that material comes out of the CANDU reactor, 0.75% of that has been converted into fission products. Those are the split atoms, and that is indicative of the energy that's come out. So that's 0.75%. The rest is still heavy atoms, uranium and something called transuranic actinides, which actually is atoms heavier than uranium that are created in the reactor. If uranium absorbs a neutron, like the U-238 does, it becomes neptunium, which then absorbs another neutron, no, it kicks out an electron, becomes plutonium, then americium, then curium, and so forth, and it becomes heavier and heavier. Those are the transuranic actinides. And all of these together have this radioactive lifespan of close to 1 million years. But if we look at the details, then it turns out that this graph indicates radiotoxicity, which is radioactivity normalized to the biological effect it has. So it's the injurious part. And our CANDU fuel waste, when it comes out of the reactor, and these are factors of 10 here, it's a log scale, is about 1 million times more radiotoxic than the natural uranium that went in. Okay? But it decays away and then stays there forever until it reaches the level of natural uranium at about 400,000 years. But the detail is that the transuranic actinides, the heavier atoms that are created in the reactor, are the ones that have the long lifetime. Whereas the fission products follow this green curve and hit the level of natural uranium at less than 300 years. So if we could get rid of the heavy atoms altogether, then we'd be left with just the fission products. And what would be the quantitative benefit in terms of radiation there? Well, essentially at 300 years or so, the radioactivity would be down by a factor of 1,000, but it keeps on going down so that at 1,000 years it would be down by a factor of 42,000. That's a tremendous reduction in radioactive burden. Or you could look at it differently and say we can reduce the lifetime from 400,000 years to less than 300. And that's a factor of 1,500. That's 3 orders of magnitude. That's an engineering quantity, or almost an astronomical quantity. So that we end up with fission products which eventually are actually 30 times less injurious than the natural uranium from which they were created. So we have 3 huge incentives here to use up the heavy atoms. We get a very large reduction in the radioactive lifetime, a very large reduction in the long-term radiotoxicity, and we have this 134-fold gain in non-carbon energy. But in addition to that, there's a little bonus for our descendants, because after 300 years, the fission products are essentially non-radioactive. And the 40,000 tons of spent CANDU fuel at that time would be worth the order of $100 billion, or $2.5 million per ton, which I mentioned earlier on, because of the contents of all of these wonderful atoms that are in there and ready to be extracted without having to be mined, because it's already there. So how can we tap the energy potential of these heavy atoms? Let's take a look at my professorial approach again of looking at what the heavy atoms actually are. The fission products have released the energy already, so we're just looking at the heavy atoms. It turns out that, in addition to the uranium that's there, we now have plutonium and americium and curium and neptunium and so forth. But some of these are actually what's called fissile. In other words, the same as the original U-235. And then they can be used in light water reactors, in CANDU reactors, and so forth. And so the world's concentration has been to try and extract these fissile elements. What's been tried are things like fluoride volatility, or a chemical process called Purex, or accelerator-driven systems, or laser-driven systems nowadays. But the only one that's really been used is Purex. And it's still being used now by Areva in France to cycle their light water reactive, so-called spent fuel, because it has still 0.9% plutonium that's fissile in it. And so they think it's worthwhile to do that. If we look at our case here, then the Purex process would extract 0.27% of fissile material in terms of the plutonium that's there. And that's about 1/3 of the original fissile material there. So we can get something more out of it, but it's a major effort. And the Nuclear Waste Management Organization looks at what they call a watching brief and to see what's out there. And they have decided that reprocessing of CANDU fuels would be prohibitively expensive and would require decades of research to prove its feasibility. That's a quote from their annual report. Now, I'm a university professor in research, so if it says decades of research, I think this is wonderful. But being a grandfather and retired, so I look at my pennies a little bit more, it's prohibitively expensive, and I don't like that part. So is there another approach? And being naive, you might ask, well, why don't we split all of the heavy atoms to extract their energy? No question is ever bad. It's the answer that you worry about. And this requires a rethink, really. And the rethink started with me with a CANDU reactor at equilibrium to see where the energy came from. And I got this from Ben Rubin and also from CanTeach, CANDU, and so forth. I usually put my references somewhere on the slide because I'm not responsible for all of them. I just look them up. And so you find that about 95% of the energy that we get is, of course, from slow neutron fission. We use slow neutrons in these reactors. But the interesting thing to me was that 5% of the energy we actually get from uranium-238, of which we have a lot. And that's by fast-neutron fission. Because when the uranium splits, it gives out fast neutrons. And before those fast neutrons get out of the fuel rod, they find another uranium, and they don't care which one, and split it. Once they're out of the fuel rod, the water slows down the neutrons. And then, of course, they become very efficient at splitting the fissile material. But they don't touch U-238 by a factor of about 50 million. So the question is, can one increase this component? And I tried very hard in my calculations on the previous version of this laptop, and I couldn't do it. It was the water that really prevented one from having fast neutrons, because water very efficiently slows down neutrons. And so on the laptop, it's easy to just leave out the water. And then things worked. But that's not an engineering solution. A reactor creates heat, and you have to carry the heat away someplace. And so, being a metallurgist, I grabbed my metals handbook and looked up low melting point metals. And you're familiar with them. Lead is one of them. It's got a melting point of about 350 degrees, which is a little high at Celsius. But, this stuff here, solder, works just as well. And since tin absorbs neutrons, you get a solder that's lead bismuth. Bismuth, that works wonderfully well. The Russians have used it. Lead bismuth is expensive. And so an alternative is to use sodium. There's lots of sodium around. And if you say liquid sodium, then some of you with gray hair say, well, I remember there are sodium-cooled reactors. And it turns out, yes, since the 1950s, we've had them. At the beginning of the nuclear age, we tried all kinds of reactors, including sodium-cooled reactors. And the first electricity that was ever produced by nuclear power was with one of those reactors just before Christmas in 1951. It was a little thing, obviously, it's sort of the size of a 5-gallon drum of roofing tar or something. And it wasn't operating at this time, otherwise this person wouldn't be standing here so blithely. But all kinds of reactors of different sizes are fast-neutron reactors that are metal-cooled. I'll talk about the EBR2 in great length a little while ago. The French, of course, know where to build them. This is the Rhone Valley there. It's very pretty. We go to Chalk River, and the Ottawa Valley is pretty as well, but it's so far out of the way. It's a sort of a 6-hour drive from where I am. But since these reactors existed and still exist, the Russians have commercial ones and they're still running, how well can a fast neutron reactor use fuel in sort of percentages? Well, the EBR2 gave us lots of data. It ran for about 30 years, and it gave us data on fuel burnup. I'm not supposed to use burnup because it's not really burned. And on fast neutron reactor safety. I'll get into that a little later. We know in the CANDU reactor, the reaction stops in the reactor after about 0.75% of the fuel is used because of fission product absorption. Neutrons are absorbed by fission products. In the fast neutron reactor, in the EBR2, it started out between 1 and 3% and went up to about 25% over time. And that was not because they built a better reactor. It was because engineers designed a better fuel canister, which is basically this little can here, because a fuel rod is a very simple device. It's a can full of uranium. And in '64, they stuffed as much uranium into the fuel can as they could. And they found that they could use it for about 1 to 3%, which is not really very much better than thermal reactors. And at about 5%, the canister failed. And it failed due to the swelling of the fuel, and that's quite natural. Uranium, when it splits, creates 2 atoms. And even though they're the same weight as the original uranium, they're of a slightly bigger volume together. And so as the reaction proceeds, the fuel swells. And so they scratched their head for a while and came up with the engineering solution not to put as much fuel into the canister, but put fuel at a level of 75% of the canister cross-section. And then, of course, it doesn't touch the canister anymore, and you need a thermal contact, so they used liquid sodium inside the fuel canister to provide the thermal contact. And they went up to 8%. And being a test reactor, they tested to failure and found that at around 11%, the canister failed again. And this time due to gaseous internal pressure, because some of the fission products that are produced are gas. Xenon, krypton, iodine, when it gets hot, is a gas or a vapor. And so, having done this once before, they decided to put a larger space into the fuel canister an empty space, a plenum, for the gas to expand into. And they immediately went up to about 18% on a regular basis, and they were quite happy with that for the longest time. And they used and recycled about 35,000 fuel pins, that's about 5 reactor folds, quite safely during that time. They tested to failure again and found that failure occurred again due to increase in gas pressure at around 23% fuel burnup, fuel usage. And so when the reactor was shut down in 1994, the Americans continued the experiment, but now used the French Phoenix reactor and designed a canister for about 25% potential burnup. And they achieved that in the French reactor, but they never tested to failure because they were guests in the French reactor. You don't do that sort of thing in somebody else's house. And so the question remained, how far can one drive this? Could one still do better? Because maybe the limitation is still pressure inside the can. So if you design an ideal can where the gaseous pressure is not dominant, then you can go to the point where it's neutron absorption by the fission products that are created, because eventually you'll have so many fission products that it'll absorb the neutrons and the reactor just will shut down. And the short answer, after I would say a massive calculation, is about 35%. And I won't give you the calculation because that'll take about an hour and a half of wonderful data. But I'll indicate to you some of the data. I've got it for all of the different elements with respect to time in the reactor of this fuel. I'll use U-238 because we've got a lot of that, and then indicate the fission product buildup and the neutrons used to produce fissions, because that's the power that we get out of a reactor. Okay? And so the CANDU refuel point would be right about there after 0.75% of use of the fuel. In this reactor, it keeps going and going and going, and it stops eventually asymptotically at a close to 50% fuel usage. That's pretty big. But if we want to create electricity, then we want the reactor also to remain constant in power. And so since we've got that data but squashed on the axis here, let me expand this. And you see that we can keep the power constant up to a certain point, and then it just sort of decays away because the fission products absorb too many neutrons. And so this would be roughly where you want to refuel. Now at that point, you haven't used up 50% of the fuel, but only 36%. Now I say only 36%. That's about 50 times more than what we use in the CANDU reactor. Now the reason that we can't maintain the power is that to control a reactor, you actually need a few extra neutrons, which you regulate then with the control rods. And so you have excess neutrons, which you regulate the way you normally do, until the fission products become so copious that they absorb too many neutrons, and the excess neutrons go to zero. So at that point, then you refuel. Then you take out the fuel bundles in this particular case, extract the fission products, because the fission products are what stop the reaction. And then you put the rest of the heavy atoms back into the reactor. Now, we've used up 36% in this case of the heavy atoms. So we want to top this up back to the original charge. And for that, we use CANDU used fuel, because CANDU used fuel is mostly uranium-238, which we've used up quite nicely. And then it's got all of these other transuranic actinides, and it's got some fission products, but less than 1% fission products doesn't bother this reactor at all. I mean, it can go up to 36% by weight of fission products. So that's nothing. It's just like fresh fuel, basically, as far as this reactor is concerned. And then you just keep on going and going and going. And every time that you do this, you use up about 35% of the fuel, which is replenished using just plain old used CANDU fuel, waste. And so in 3 cycles, we would have used up 1 reactor full of CANDU fuel waste completely. Now I've got one of the transuranic actinides here, the plutonium-239, as an example. Now you know that builds up in the CANDU reactor, and so do the other actinides. But you see here, it sort of increases slightly and then goes back down as the U-238 goes down. Some of this gets used up. And by the time you refuel, you're back at exactly the same concentration that you started with. So it doesn't increase at all. If we look at the other actinides, plutonium-240 behaves exactly the same way. Plutonium-241 this way, and uranium-236, which is created from uranium-235, comes in and then gets used up as well. This reactor doesn't care whether it's a fertile material or a fissile material. It just splits them. There's one thing I should mention here, and that is the plutonium-240 content in relation to plutonium-239. This is what makes this process relatively proliferation resistant, because you can't use this material to build a bomb. You need high purity plutonium-239. And here you've got the order of 30% of plutonium as plutonium-240. So it just doesn't work that way. So since the long-lived transuranic actinides in the reactor are constant from cycle to cycle, except for this variation within the cycle, we can say that all of the transuranics in the uranium that come in with the top-up portion are used up at the end of the cycle completely. And so that means since they're used up, that also eliminates the long-term radioactive burden that is in the current spent CANDU fuel. So if we look at this curve again, the transuranic actinides are gone, and we're down to this particular situation. So if we look at our 3 huge incentives that I indicated before, we've actually achieved that with using a waste-consuming fast-neutron reactor. And so we can now ask some practical questions. Is a fast-neutron reactor safe? Or can we build or purchase one? We can always build one. You know, the EBR2 plans are actually sort of in a book you can get in the library with machine drawings in it and dimensions. It's amazing. Can we build an efficient fuel cycle facility? And then finally, how does such a fuel cycle process compare to putting the material down into a deep geological repository? I indicated that the EBR2 in its life, the 30-year life, also indicated, provided data on fast-neutron reactor safety. And this is very important. The reactor itself is sort of partially underground, and it's the square little box, which I will enlarge next. But in 1986, during its life, they tested this reactor under electrical blackout conditions. That's very similar to what happened in Fukushima, because they lost their electricity, they lost their batteries, they lost their diesel generator backups and so forth, and so there was no electricity. And so they simulated this, obviously, before Fukushima. This is the reactor tank here. It's basically like a bathtub without a stopper in the bottom, so it's solid. The fluid really can't get away. Any access is via the top lid. The reactor vessel itself is submerged in the liquid, in this case liquid sodium. It could be lead bismuth. And it's got a primary pump here, and which pumps the fluid through the reactor core, past the reactor rods, and into a secondary heat exchanger here, which has a circuit which takes non-radioactive liquid sodium in this case, and heats it up and pumps it out. So all of this is non-radioactive because it never enters the core. One could use an organic liquid here if you don't like liquid sodium. That's been used in white shell in by our own AECL. So that exists. And what they did in their safety tests was inactivate the pumps and also immobilize the control rods. Now, who would do a foolish thing like this? But they did it. And you'd expect this thing just to heat up and melt down. Well, the beginnings of that perhaps worry you. This is where the experiment started here at 0 time, and the temperature went up and up and up. But when it reached 700 degrees from 470, it turned over and went back down again, and within about 5 minutes it was back down to where it was normally operating and below. In other words, the reactor shut itself down, even though they had shut off the pumps and inactivated the control rods. I think that's marvelous. It has such a strong negative temperature coefficient that as this went up, the power just shut off. Now in Fukushima, the problem was really the decay heat removal, because once you shut the reactor down, which they did in Fukushima, the fuel rods still emit a lot of heat, and they do that in a reactor for the order of 2 weeks or longer before it's reasonably down. So in this case, what happens? Well, obviously the liquid in the reactor tank heats up, but they actually installed already normally, for normal circumstances, for normal shutdown, 2 thermal convection coolers, which required no power at all. It was just the property of the liquid. As it heats up, it rises, becomes lighter, goes out of the reactor building, and the heat is dispersed by a second thermal convection cooler by air. Hot air rises, it's heated up and goes through, and then the cold liquid comes back down and so forth. And they had 2 of those. And they use that every time they shut the reactor down. So it's not an emergency facility here at all. It's something that's normal. And if they deliberately prevented the flow in the coolers, then without the coolers, as you might expect, the temperature rises. Even with 1 cooler, after about a day, it's back to normal after rising the order of 25 degrees Fahrenheit. Here, with 2 coolers operating, it rises maybe about 3 degrees Celsius, and then cools it down. So they had a reactor which did this sort of thing normally. So, in effect, we had safety features which gave you no coolant loss, which was important in some of the other accidents, no hydrogen formation, because obviously there's no water here. It shut down passively on system blackout because of the strong negative temperature coefficient. And we had passive removal of fission product decay heat. So this reactor would have avoided the Fukushima consequences because of 1, 2, and 3, and 4 here. It would have avoided 3 Mile Island problems because there was no coolant loss there. And similarly, Chernobyl, there was no coolant loss in this reactor. So, and that was operating from 64 to 94. So I think it's fairly safe. Can we buy or build a fast-neutron reactor? Well, we can always build, but it turns out that we can actually buy. We can go to the Russians, which have reactors, the Indians. We can go to the Japanese, who shut down theirs lately. We can go to the French. And so, maybe one closer to home appeals to you more. And it turns out that GE Hitachi designed the PRISM reactor So I went to them and said, what does it cost? And they said, well, it depends on the country and the various ifs, ands, and buts, and so forth, and environmental problems and lawyers and so forth. So they wouldn't give me an answer. But they're offering this reactor to England, to the United Kingdom, to take care of their excess plutonium. And they are going to give that reactor free, except they're going to charge them for every kilogram of plutonium that they use up. But in the process, one of their executives mentioned in the newspaper, and I couldn't find it immediately, but I remember it quite well, that this reactor would be equivalent in cost to one of the large light water reactors, and that's about 1,000 megawatts. Since this one is 600 megawatts, then it's about a factor of 1.5 more in cost. And since this is a first of a kind, we can compare that to historical reactors. In Russia, for instance, comparing their reactor to a Russian light water reactor, it was about 1.5 times more and so forth, and 25% and 30% more in the various other countries in these comparisons. So that's sort of reasonable. It should be cheaper once we build more of them. Can we build an efficient fuel cycle facility? Well, it turns out these things existed. There was one that was attached to the EBR-2 already, and here's a cartoon indicating how they moved the used fuel, temporarily used fuel, into this corridor here, then dismantled the fuel assemblies, processed them with pyroprocessing, and then reassembled fresh fuel rods, which then went back in again with the heavy atoms after they've taken out the fission products. If you're an engineer, you may prefer flow sheets. And in this flow sheet that was by Yun Chang at the Argonne, who was responsible with Chuck Till for building this. Chuck Till is actually a Canadian connection. I have Jim Till in my department, who is a cousin of Chuck Till. So somehow it must have rubbed off subliminally that I'm talking about this. They indicate that you can use oxide fuel or metal fuel. Metal fuel is used in their reactor to go directly into an electro refiner, and then eventually gets refabricated into new fuel rods. The oxide fuel has to be reduced first, and that can come from CANDUs or light water reactors, and then once it's a metal, it goes through this process. And this is not illusory, because these things actually exist. This is the electro refiner, obviously before it was put into operation. And a smaller version of this has been working since 1996 on the EBR-2 spent fuel, once they shut it down in 1994. And it's still operating, as you can see here, probably go higher than this in 2011 and 2012. So it's not something that doesn't exist except on paper. It's real. So you can ask, how efficient is it? The Argonne people indicated that the current version of the pyro process features efficient, more than 99.9% recovery of the actinide elements. That means that those elements have been taken out of the fission products, which is what we're interested in. And that says that the long-lived actinide content in the fission products is reduced by a factor of 1,000 or more. And what does that mean in terms of radioactivity? Well, the radiotoxicity at a factor of 1,000 is back down to natural uranium metal. And so since it'll be 300 years before we want to get at the fission products, we've got 300 years of chemical expertise to use to try and do better than this. Okay, but we can get it down to that level already, which is good. So how do fuel cycling costs compared to a deep geological repository? Well, Till and Chang at the Argonne, since they're operating that thing, made an estimate for a 1,000 megawatt reactor, and the facility would cost of the order of $100 million. It's a lot of money, but once you realize how much electricity you can produce with this fuel, it turns out that the cost is about 0.4 cents per kilowatt hour. So that means we can compare that to the cost of burying the used fuel. Never mind the fact that in this case we can get out electricity and we can reduce the radiotoxicity. Here, this deep geological repository, say with a capacity of 3.6 million bundles, is supposed to cost $24.4 billion as its life cycle costs. We've already stored 2.2 million bundles at the reactor sites and collected from the electricity produced by those $2.3 billion, which is in trust, and that increases. So we've got 1.4 million bundles to go to collect the rest of the somewhere $20 billion in future. So the remaining costs, assuming that they don't put it under a mattress but actually earn some interest from it, would be the order of 0.9 cents. Interest isn't very high at the moment, so this is reasonable. You can calculate for a different number as well. But that says that the fuel cycling, this approach for a fast neutron reactor, is about less costly by a factor of 2 than disposal in a deep geological repository. I'll forget about that. But there are human factors as well. I mean, we've got these 22 communities somewhere in northern Ontario and Saskatchewan that want to have one of these deep geological repositories because, you know, there's $24 billion attached to that somehow. But if we look at that and say, well, instead of a deep geological repository, why not build them a fast neutron reactor and fuel cycle facility? That has tremendous advantages. It gives them highly skilled jobs for, well, Pickering and Bruce are examples of what kind of jobs there are. Whereas the Nuclear Waste Management Organization indicates that most of the local jobs are going to be transport and service and catering and this sort of thing. They're going to be the order of hundreds of jobs according to their triennial report in 2008 to 2010. In Pickering and Bruce, of course, it's a collection of plants, but the U.S. estimate is that one has about 500 highly skilled people working per plant. And that's going to last centuries because we've got lots of used fuel to process. Whereas once we've built the DGR and filled it, the jobs are gone. Whereas in this case, if they have something that produces energy, they can use it and they can sell it. And we know that the more energy you use, the higher your standard of living. So this is going to increase their standard of living tremendously. So I think it's a real advantage. So I've indicated to you that waste management is about 2 times less costly than burying the material. Never mind that you create electricity and reduce the radiotoxicity. I've indicated that the technology is available today. It's not something that's decades down the road. And I'll try to show you that we actually may have startup funds for this from the Nuclear Waste Trust, those $2.3 billion that have been collected. Because the Nuclear Fuel Waste Act in Section 20, that's what created the Nuclear Waste Management Organization, says that if if you'll forgive the breaks here, that's all the legalese and the boilerplating in there. This is just the heart of it. If a new technological method is developed that has been reviewed by experts from international governmental organization, we can't do it ourselves, we have to get other nations into it, and receive their support, then the Nuclear Waste Management Organization may propose this new approach for the management of nuclear fuel waste. Well, those funds are for the management of nuclear fuel waste. So if we can just persuade them that they should go in this direction, we have potential funds available. There's a problem, of course, that the Nuclear Waste Management Organization has its marching orders from the Nuclear Fuel Waste Act, and that says, look at a deep geological repository storage or centralized storage, and they wisely adopted sort of a combination of things and a go-slow approach called the adaptive phased management. But when I go to the federal people, because this is federal oversight basically, then they sort of hesitate if I say, well, I want to eliminate the nuclear fuel waste productively by producing electricity at the same time. And the reason they hesitate is that we've got a constitutional problem, because electricity production or energy production, whether it's nuclear, hydro, coal, wind, or anything, is constitutionally part of provincial powers. And so the proposal here touches both the provincial and the federal jurisdictions, and that's a little tough. And in addition to that, of course, we have party considerations to consider, which are liberal and conservatives at the moment. So if there's anyone in the audience that can stick handle through this, I would really like their assistance. Because I don't think I'm going to stop trying to persuade people, but it's more efficient if you do it with knowledge. So in summary then, there are benefits to the fast-neutron reactor fuel cycling approach, which I've indicated. It's very large reduction in waste decay times, a very large reduction in long-term radiotoxicity, and this tremendous gain in non-carbon energy. Some people may say, well, that should be number one. Well, any reactor produces a lot of energy. So I think getting rid of the nuclear waste in this way, in this productive way, is much, much better. I've indicated that the reactor, the EBR-2-like reactor, has inherent safety features which were demonstrated by the USA. That reactor ran for 30 years. The Russians have run their reactors for over 40 years or 30 years as well, and so has France. So we've got reactor years of experience with these types of reactors. I touched on proliferation resistance. I haven't touched on load following, but I've touched on waste management being about 2 times less. In other words, it's even more economical to go in this direction than to just bury it. Never mind the other advantages that we get. And the technology is available today. And if we do it right, with your help, I think we've got the startup funds to do this. Because once we get in this direction, the reactor will produce revenue from electricity, and we can build another one. In other words, it will be self-supporting if we do it right. So we have a choice, really, either to go into the Deep Geological Repository and spend $24 billion and get virtually nothing in return, or we can have about 4,000 years of green energy at the current rate of using it, and produce $50 trillion worth of electricity. I mean, that's so much electricity that if we went into a non-carbon economy, our waste alone would run all of Canada with every form of energy for the order of 400 years. So I don't think there's an energy problem at all that we're looking at. We just have to look at it correctly. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have some microphones throughout here, so if you have any questions, please come to the microphone, and I hope they're good.
Hi, Peter. Paul Icooney from the Engineering Society. One particular accident which is really nasty is the control runaway of the pump.
Probably indicate a vaporization of the liquid so that you don't have the cooling anymore. But you've got such a large volume of liquid there, plus it's still at atmospheric pressure. The entire reactor runs at atmospheric pressure rather than is pressurized. And so, what was I going to say? And you've got a leeway in terms of the boiling point of the liquid. If you use sodium, it's 850 degrees before anything will vaporize. If it's lead bismuth, it's the order of 1500 degrees Celsius. So I think to get into that situation would be difficult. I'm not saying that it will never happen because I'm an engineer and I've got an iron ring and I'm supposed to realize that there are the vagaries of inanimate objects.
You know that's true for the Chernobyl reactor, but for the SL1 research reactor in the States, it wasn't a thermal event that caused the loss of control. It was a maintenance error where they actually removed the rods from the core too quickly. And it caused a prompt critical reaction resulting in one person dying. So the reactor safety analysis requires you to look at all of the potential ways you can screw up a reactor, and one of them could be a maintenance error or what have you. And I was just wondering if there's any analysis that's been done on the prompt critical reaction, because that's the most serious. It actually results in the destruction of the building.
Well, like I say, I haven't looked into that, so I can't really answer that directly. I mean, the accident that you talk about, I mean, there's some rumor that that individual actually had a problem with his wife and basically decided to end his life. So I'm not sure that it's necessarily an accident. It may have been.
It is for the guy next door.
Well, for his buddy there, yeah.
Could I offer a powerful response to the question?
Sure.
I think it's unrealistic to expect that the most severe prompt critical, such as the SL1 accident, can be prevented. That was pretty unique and a lot of lessons learned. You can try, but the approach of the CANDU reactors to this is to have two independent and diverse shutdown systems, recognizing that the severe loss of control or prompt critical accident could occur, and you can't prevent it from occurring for sure. The maintenance error was a disaster for sure. But I think that's the short answer to it, that it's perhaps unique that in going way back when, the original safety principles established by Dr. Hurst in the early days were two independent, diverse shutdown systems. That's it.
Well, I would think that we're by now smart enough to introduce those. So I'm not in the field, so I will trust the experts to do that.
Frank Marwa from OPG. I would just like to add to that, it's not only two, but we have 4 independent shutdown systems for CANDU as of now. Just information on that.
Well, I'm not knocking the CANDU reactor. I indicated to you early on that I thought it was the best thermal reactor going. So, I will just say that I like it, but it produces nuclear waste. Okay, and this is one way to complement what the CANDU reactor does in a very productive way, rather than just throwing the material away.
Let me ask a very sort of naive question. You're using fast-neutron, okay, and effectively as a fuel, you're using just all of the waste stuff that you have. What initiates all these reactions? What makes things happen? Why don't they happen down at the bottom of the ground?
Basically, you notice that when this reactor was running cycle after cycle, the level of fissile material was the order of 6.5%. Okay, so in the ground you don't have that much. Well, you did billions of years ago, and that's why you had the natural.
No, but I mean in the waste in your deep
But the waste that we've got right now is way below something that can even be activated with heavy water, never mind normal water. The absorption of normal water is such that you will never get this material to become, to get into what should I say, an equilibrium state and become a reactor in the ground, because there just is not enough material there for the fission reaction to occur. That's why we can't even use it in a CANDU reactor anymore.
But there has to be What's the source of your fast neutrons?
Oh, the source of the fast neutrons is the single splitting of a uranium or other heavy atom. When that splits, well, it's triggered by one neutron going in, and then when it splits, it releases the order of 3 fast neutrons. They just are part of the reaction. You create 2 half atoms, you might say roughly half.
No, I understand that, but what is it that you do to its waste?
To make it work?
It's not done normally to make that happen.
Well, you put it into an environment where you have enough fissile material or material that fast neutrons reactors, fast neutrons can normally use to split. And since normal uranium works quite well once you've got this reactor started, our nuclear waste is so much normal uranium that it works just as well as if you took fresh fuel. Maybe you and I should sit down because I'm obviously missing what you're asking.
Well, yeah, I think you are, or maybe I'm missing what you're saying.
Okay.
Thank you very much. It was very exciting to hear your description of DGR. I'm from a community in Ontario, Southern Shores, that has its council have one of these facilities. And they're huge and they're extremely dangerous. And the community is split, terribly split, because of something like this, which worried about it, but because of the position of the community to boost power plant and the culture that's become there of work and agreement with the industry that all seem to be able to voice their opinion about operations. It's a great place to see. That's really been nurtured over many decades. The scale of this is enormous. It's 1,000 acres underground. Sort of like when from Bloor Street to Gardner and from Spadina to Young Street, that's 1,000 acres. Beneath any community is lower to put into this. It should be used, but highly the way to do business is tending to neutralize. So at any rate, we're an organization that's gone on to, in the last year, to in opposition to it. And the question often comes up, well, what are you going to do with nuclear waste? And rather than burying it, what can you possibly do with something that's so terrible that we've created up the back end of this wonderful, miraculous process of creating electricity from such tiny things, fascinating science. That you are proposing a parallel a process of reducing the toxicity. Generating so much electricity that as we go should make a difference, should resonate with people who are trying to figure this out, not just look for short term, so that the solutions are burying it and leaving it for again. I find it, what are your, looking ahead, do you see this inevitable that the idea of DGR will be proven less appealing or even corrupt in the sense of how it's being implemented? But we're hooked on it. There's a great deal of money to be made, fast money to be made, just putting it in the ground. But it isn't, is it vulnerable, and particularly in relation to the science that we're describing? Are we going to go to a better solution? Is I guess what I'm asking.
I would like to say yes, but I certainly need your help. So far I've been going around talking to a lot of people because I think as soon as I talk to them, it's sort of self-evident that we should go in this direction. But people that have not heard this complete story will say, well, this is obviously just a rough calculation. Well, I mean, it's an easy rough calculation. It's not that rough to come up with the $48.6 trillion. But I've tried to give you the background of why I think this works. And I think that's important because the understanding is important. If you have nothing else, then of course you say, I'm going to put it into a deep hole and hope beyond hope that it will never appear again in the next several 100,000 years. What I'm saying here is that the physics of it, the understanding of what happens, gives us another solution which I think is better.
Someone wants to contact you to carry this further. Do they do it through?
You can. The usual university email address, which is peter.ottensmeyer@utoronto.ca. I think everyone at U of T has a similar address.
Peter, there's an interesting aspect of the fast-neutron reactor that actually is interesting from an electrical grid point of view. Our current thermal reactors suffer from xenon poisoning when we try to lower their power, and they can't come back up if we go too far, too fast. And from a grid point of view, it's nice to turn these things down at night so that we can allow the wind to blow without knocking the nuclear plants offline. Could you just describe a little bit why the fast-neutron reactor can maneuver and the thermal reactors can't?
Well, I have about 75 slides at the end of my talk,
Maybe not that many.
including the xenon idea. Let's see if that gets me there. Yes, this is a bit of physics, okay? Because that's how it happens. What we have here is a graph of the cross-section of something, or the probability of something happening along this line in factors of 10. And along that line, we have neutron energy. A thermal reactor works in this region. A fast neutron reactor works in this energy region for the neutrons. Okay? And each of these lines here indicates either for a particular element or isotope, the absorption that it undergoes with neutrons at different energies. For the fuel lines, it would be the fission that it undergoes. And I've highlighted three of these here. One is iodine-135, which is created in the reactor normally. I've highlighted xenon-135, which is the material that we know of that has the highest neutron absorption of any of the materials that we've got in the reactor. And what happens is that when you shut the reactor off, you've got a lot of iodine-135 there. But it naturally changes or decays into xenon-135 with time, with a half-life of 6.5 hours. So you might say it takes about 3 times as long for most of it to become xenon-135. So if you shut the reactor down with using control rods, then with time, the xenon-135 accumulates and it acts like a super control rod. So it just mops up neutrons that are there. And you can't get a reactor started without neutrons. And so for the reactor to be restarted, you actually have to wait until that xenon naturally decays and it becomes cesium-135. And that takes with a half-life of 9.5 hours. So 3 times of that is before you can do something is a day and a half. So you got almost a day and a half here and a day and a half there. So it'll take you about 3 days once you've shut the reactor down before the physics of it is such that you can restart it. So that's the problem with the current reactors in trying to sort of follow or shut down and so forth. If you've got too much wind, you want the reactors to be down. And then if the wind dies, it takes 3 days for the reactor to come back up again. And so that's a problem. If you have a fast neutron reactors, you know, I should say that the difference here between this absorption of iodine-135 to the xenon is the order of 10,000. So it's a big difference. And that's why it absorbs so many neutrons, and that's why you can't restart the reactor. Here, in the fast reactor regime, the iodine going to xenon increases in absorption by just a little bit. So you have enough leeway in your control rods that you can adjust for that. And so then later on it changes into xenon-135 and it doesn't make much difference at all. And so in this reactor you can just go down in power, come up in power, you can shut it off for the weekend and come back on Sunday and turn it on again. So they've actually done that with these reactors. So it's no problem in a fast neutron reactor. It's just the sort of lovely physics there compared to the, well, what physics throws at you here. It's the way that isotopes were built by God.
Wondering about how you stated it. You talked about green energy. Our politicians have made the decisions there. It seems to me, I can all agree, but fire plants. They put windmills, solar panels all over the place. So far that in Ontario they have shut down. They can't do reactors. Is shutting down reactors. Politicians are. Isn't the way to go about this to go straight to the politicians? Exaggerate greenhouse gas positives here more than anything to convince them and get moving.
Well, it depends on which hot button you want to hit, because there's a whole community that says that climate change isn't real. And greenhouse gases, man-made greenhouse gases have nothing to do with it and so forth. So I'd be fighting that as well. So you can get experts in either direction. And the climate, your weatherman predicts that it's going to rain and it doesn't, or the other way around. That's sort of, to me, much more difficult than a nuclear reactor. And so all I can say is that a reactor like this produces energy without creating carbon dioxide, which is a greenhouse gas, okay? But then if you get into climate change and so forth, I'm out of my depth. Even though I'm a scuba diver, it's deeper than that. So I really, if you want to run that way and you have the knowledge to counteract all of the various other arguments, then yes, go ahead, please, help me.
I don't have that either, but I just attended my 40th anniversary a couple of weeks ago, and they had a speaker show CO2 increases, and we all read about glaciers melting.
Yes.
And he gave the example of glaciers melting Himalayas, and 3 major rivers come from the water to a few billion people. So I don't know either about global warming, but
I would say if carbon dioxide is a major cause of this, this certainly is a major solution. I've tackled this from the point of view of nuclear waste and its long-term effects. And I don't think anybody can argue that this is beneficial, no matter what stripe you have. And so everything else, I think, is gravy. I would say even the energy production is gravy. We can get rid of the deleterious effects of nuclear waste this way. If you want to squander the energy in doing this by not using the heat that's created, well, okay, at least we'll get rid of the dangerous effects of nuclear waste, but that would be foolish. So I think we might as well create electricity while we're at it, because energy is always good. It's good for our standard of living. And here's a way of being green without really sacrificing energy. So I think it's good all around. And yes, we can solve global warming. We can solve nuclear waste problems, and we can avoid any energy constraints. So I think it's a major way to go.
I just wanted to ask you about other jurisdictions. We had a number of Chinese nuclear people over to visit. I wasn't in the center of your discussion, but I picked up that I thought China was looking at this kind of. I don't know if you knew how far along they were or how serious they are to get full utilization of their fuel cycle. Do you have any insights about China?
Well, I probably haven't heard more than you have, but I know that Russia is definitely helping the Chinese in building these reactors. And the Chinese are looking at any form of energy. So they include fast-neutron reactors, they include thermal reactors, they include windmills, they include everything. Okay, they have enough people, they need energy. This is a wonderful way to go because it's so efficient. You need so little fuel to create a tremendous amount of energy. I mean, one ton gives you $1 billion worth of electricity. I mean, that's mind-boggling. Yes, and
The Chinese politicians were getting behind something there.
I'm sorry, I'm a Canadian. I would like us to do something.
Practical concerns that I'd like to bring to your attention. Let me put on a devil's advocate, pretend I'm a politician, which I'm not. You've got to convince me of things like, is there sufficient space in present nuclear facilities to do the possibility of employment in Canada for the people who are going to be doing so, are going to be buying offshore because of supporting offshore things.
Well, this is why I say we can build or we can buy. To get into this quickly, because it's no longer there. Was it one? Let's try that. Yeah, to get into this quickly, of course, we can buy. But I've got the machine drawings here, so we can build too. And being an engineer, I have the arrogance that says that I can do this. Okay. So I don't think there's a problem. Sodium is basically just a component of salt. We've got oceans around us, so we should be able to do that here locally. Okay? To start one of these reactors, you need about, the order of, say, 7% fissile material. So we have to look at our used fuel and see if we want to extract the plutonium for that to start one of these reactors, or whether we buy from the United States to do that to start with. I mean, if we buy from GE Hitachi, obviously they can't run their reactor without having enriched fuel to start. But after it's there, it goes on forever because it just maintains the fissile material sort of like a catalyst. It doesn't get used up, or it gets recreated as it's used up. And so then it goes on forever. So it's the startup that is a difficulty. We have AECL that has hot cells, which are ideal for the fuel cycle facility. In terms of size, let's see, can I go back a few? The fuel cycle facility isn't very large. If you look at footprint here, sorry, for you I should do this here. If you look at the footprint, the reactor building isn't very large, and this may be a footprint that's twice as the footprint of this. So it's not very large at all. We can do it at Bruce. I haven't looked at how much footprint there is at Pickering, and I haven't been to Darlington, so I don't know. But it seems to me we can easily build it where the used fuel is right now, or we can easily build it anywhere, because it's not a very large reactor. Okay? What you then want probably is enough field around it so you can put up a barbed wire fence for security purposes nowadays, which is kind of sad, but it's a reality. And at Bruce, you already have that. Pickering seems almost leisurely by comparison. But it would be excellent, say, to put at the Pickering plant, because it's about to be shut down. So you've got lots of used fuel, but they're transporting it to the Bruce site, I presume. So might as well do it at the Bruce site. But the Nuclear Waste Management Organization has to move all of that used fuel to wherever they're going to have their DGR. And so you're going to move fuel that way. So it doesn't matter where you build one of these facilities, really, you can always move the fuel to that facility. And I think it can be virtually entirely Canadian if we put our mind to it. This reactor was built in 2 years and cost $30 million. So now it'll cost maybe 10 times as much or more because of environmental assessments and all kinds of things and so on and so forth. But every reactor would be faced with the same kind of hurdles. You say, can we do it in Canada? Yes, we can do it in Canada. It creates jobs here, and they're good jobs, and they last a long time. Okay, the DGR, I don't think, they'll import people to do the heavy lifting, but the local community will just sort of get some of the crumbs from that. Whereas the local community will have a major economic impact with one of these facilities.
Professor, thank you very much on behalf of, oh, sorry, there's one more question.
Peter,
Yes.
I'm not sure, but were the initiatives taken by the Toronto to bring federal and provincial on a table to discuss these matters and explain them the benefits of this one? Because what I see as of now, and that we have all the facilities and we have all the basic resources, and if we build this FNR in parallel with the tools available there, probably it could be a very good economic boost to Canadian economy, specifically to Ontario. Okay. So my question is this one. This is, as I see this one, India has right from 70s when I was there working for Atomic Energy Commission of India. And at Kalpatan, they were building for PMP. And Russia was working in parallel with India also. Now, regardless of whatever this green energy, solar, and this or that, but we are talking specifically, this is a huge amount, huge benefits of having FNR here. Okay. And that's what it immediately gives me after attending this 1 hour presentation given by you. And you have done tremendous job on this in bringing up this thing to the community. But what I see and that this publicity of this particular thing to the public, as well as bringing Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission on the table to discuss with University of Toronto or all the intellectuals who have this particular knowledge.
I would say I'm working at it. Okay? I have given a seminar like this to the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission in Ottawa already, so they're aware of that. I have persuaded the Dean of Engineering to reintroduce some courses into the program that deal with fast neutrons. I've talked to some politicians individually. I haven't been able to bring all of them to the same table. That's where I need help. So I am not discouraged because so far one door seems to be open and another one opens and another one opens. So it's going to happen. Even this talk today, I hope will open some more doors so that more people in power are aware that this possibility exists, that we can do it now, and that we actually have the money to do it. It won't cost the provincial government or the federal government a penny. We've already paid into this nuclear waste management fund.
And that's what I see here. And when Jim Faraday put initiatives for Ontario Institute of Technology at the University of Ontario Institute of Technology, and introduced nuclear courses for bachelors of engineering in there. And not only they are doing masters in nuclear engineering, but this kind of fast neutron technology to bring it here. At the same time, we have all these sources, and just requires them, like Finance Minister Jim, he is a Durham region resident. His wife is a provincial conservative in this one, and CNSC, and you have all the people at the door, and it's just a matter of arranging meetings with them and discussing a little bit more on this one. Results could be anything, but more initiative, more publicity on the issue, which can impact quite a bit in the region.
Well, I agree with you wholeheartedly. I would say that I have approached various governmental agencies and if I go there directly, I get a polite letter back. What works is that someone who knows them introduces me because they need someone that they trust to say, you should listen to Ottensmeyer. Okay? If Ottensmeyer goes there directly, they basically don't know me from Adam. So I require assistance. So you can suggest that I go there and there and there, and it really doesn't work. If you have someone who has a friend, who has an acquaintance that then knows the right person, that's the way to go. Okay?
Understand. Thank you very much.
Sorry, just one more question.
Just a quick question. I'm a graduate student from Civil Engineering School, and I wonder, in terms of the fast-neutron reactor, that if there are some things us and civil engineers need to specifically concern when we building a nuclear plant, based on your research.
I don't think that you have to concern yourself any more than with the current reactors, because it's still just a plain old nuclear reactor. I think in a sense it's simpler than some of the thermal reactors. And so, the safety concerns are similar and so forth, but it has some properties which are really advantageous. But that doesn't mean that you can cut corners. You have to be just as careful. And as I indicated, it probably won't be any cheaper until we've built a whole number of them. But it's in the same ballpark, so there's nothing really different. Every nuclear reactor creates a lot of power. This one gets rid of nuclear waste. But beyond that, I would say it's got the similar problems instead of building it, or the similar advantages in terms of building it. I don't see any difference, really.
All right. Professor Ottensmeyer, I want to thank you on behalf of the Ontario Centre for Engineering and Public Policy and Professional Engineers Ontario and all our guests here today for such a lucid and convincing argument. Made me understand it a lot better. And
thank you very much.
And then a little bit from us. And I want to assure you that both the Center and PEO will assist you in getting this information to the government. Our president, Dennis Dixon, the president of Professional Engineers Ontario, has already brought this to the attention of the Premier's office. We've been in discussions with their policy people on other issues, and this is an issue that came up. Because there's a lot of interest here and a lot of concern about how to move forward with this idea, I'd like to make an open invitation to anyone here and anybody else that you might know to let us know if you would be interested in participating in a working group through the Ontario Centre for Engineering and Public Policy, where we could develop this idea more, get information together, and in a way that we could bring to the powers that make decisions in the province and in the country. And so you can go to our website, or you might have information in the package about our contacting us at the Ontario Centre for Engineering and Public Policy, or I can leave you my card if you want to come up to me after the meeting, and we'll form a working group. I also want to tell you that this presentation will be on our website. Are all the slides included in the presentation?
It seems that way, yes.
Okay, so all the slides, including the ones that weren't shown today that are basically appendices to the presentation, are in the package that you can find on the website with the presentation. And we'll be sending out a survey tomorrow or in the next few days about this seminar to ask your any ideas you might have, your input into the survey, the seminar, answer some questions about how efficient it was in getting the message across. Is there anything else I forgot, Catherine?
They can send it for the working group to the info at OCEPP. The business card is in the folder.
Okay, yes. All right, and with that, do we have the room for a little while longer? Yeah, okay. You might be able to continue some discussions for the next few minutes until they kick us out, but anyways, I hope that we do hear from you. I think this would make an interesting opportunity for the center to delve into its mandate of trying to bring engineers to talk to government directly about engineering solutions to problems in society, and this is definitely one of them. And so if you're interested in the working group, please let us know. Thank you very much, and I hope you come to some more summits.
Picture with you with one of your slides, your favorite slide.
Okay.
You like this one? Oh, right up here.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah, okay. Big smiley smile.
Okay.
Looking here. Hang on. Hang on, and big smile. There we go.
Okay.
Excuse me, I just want to take a slide. Can you just back up a second? Great.
Good.
Thank you.